You will
The
do
Vampire
exactly
King
as I
called her weak
say,
for
or
sleeping
your
all day,
family will suffer the
discovers she was
consequences.
draining her life to heal him. Even in the daytime, the castle seemed drenched in twilight, as if the sun itself feared to enter. Inside, long corridors were lined with tapestries depicting battles of old, and the air was heavy with the scent of ancient stone and incense. Kale, tall and commanding, ruled over his people with icy authority. His eyes, sharp and silver, missed nothing. His presence was a shadow that bent the will of everyone who entered his court. And yet, even he had a secret. For weeks, Kale had felt a weakness gnawing at him. His strength, once limitless, now faltered. His reflection in polished obsidian showed dark circles under eyes that usually burned with light. Whispers of a curse had begun to swirl through the court, and Kale, prideful and proud, would not admit to it. It was on one cold morning, as the mists curled around the towers like ghosts, that Alara arrived. She moved quietly through the halls, pale and delicate, with hair the color of midnight silk. She carried herself with a soft elegance, though her eyes held a depth that seemed almost endless. She slept through much of the day, resting in the lightless corners of the castle, and the courtiers whispered behind their hands. "She is weak," one guard murmured to another. "Sleeping while the king suffers." Kale, who had been observing from a balcony, frowned. He had seen many things in his long life, but something about this girl unsettled him. She did not fear him, nor did she bow too soon. She was quiet, almost fragile in appearance, yet there was a stillness about her that seemed unnatural. When he called her to the main hall, she moved with hesitant steps, eyes barely open, and her pale skin glowed softly under the flickering torches. "You sleep while I am unwell," Kale said, his voice low and commanding. "Do you not care about the king's strength?" Alara's lips parted slightly, as if she were about to speak, but no sound came. Her hands remained folded in her lap. The silence in the hall stretched uncomfortably until Kale's sharp glare made the courtiers shift nervously. "I see," Kale said, turning his attention to the others. "This one is nothing but a shadow, weak, useless." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall, and Alara lowered her gaze. She felt the weight of every word, yet she did not protest. There was a secret she could not reveal, a truth that might make Kale angered beyond reason, or worse, drive him away. That night, as the moon rose high and silvered the black forest, Kale retired to his chambers. He felt a strange pull, a whisper of warmth and shadow, and realized that Alara had not left the castle entirely. In the quiet of the corridors, he noticed that his wounds, minor scratches from a sparring match earlier in the week, had begun to fade, almost as if they were never there. Kale frowned. Wounds did not heal so quickly, not even for him. His senses, usually precise and unyielding, tingled with unease. Slowly, he walked through the halls, following the faint trail of a strange energy that he could not name. It led him to a small chamber where Alara lay sleeping. Her chest rose and fell steadily, but there was a pale light around her hands, like mist curling in the darkness. He knelt beside her, curiosity warring with irritation. "What are you hiding, girl?" he whispered. Alara stirred, eyes fluttering open. They were deep, like endless nights, and Kale felt a chill in his heart he did not understand. She looked at him with a strange mixture of apology and determination. I sleep," she said softly, "because I must." Kale's frown deepened. "Must? Do you mean you are too weak to walk, or do you hide some foolish excuse for idleness?" Alara shook her head faintly. "Neither. I cannot explain fully yet." Kale felt a flicker of irritation, but also an unfamiliar curiosity. No one had ever denied him so calmly. He studied her closely and noticed a faint shimmer in her hands, almost imperceptible, but it radiated warmth. A strange sensation ran through him. His fatigue, the heaviness he had carried for weeks, eased slightly. "Did you do this?" Kale asked, his voice low, wary. Alara did not answer immediately. Her lips trembled, but she only nodded slightly. I help." Kale's anger flared, quickly replaced by disbelief. "Help? You draw your life to heal me." She lowered her eyes, pale fingers brushing the hem of her cloak. "I do not wish for thanks. It is necessary." For a long moment, Kale said nothing. The air between them was heavy, charged with a strange tension that neither understood. He had seen power before, dark and destructive, but never had he encountered it so quiet, so gentle, and yet so consuming. "You risk your own life for me," Kale finally said, almost in a whisper. The words tasted foreign, heavy with emotion he had long buried. Alara did not speak. Her lips parted as if to explain, but the words would not come. Instead, her hand brushed his sleeve gently, and Kale felt a surge of warmth, an energy that wrapped around him like a protective cloak. He realized then that she had been sacrificing herself in silence, giving him strength while keeping her own frailty hidden. A bitter pang of guilt struck him. He had called her weak, mocked her in front of his court, and now he understood the depth of her courage. He who had commanded armies and ruled with fear was humbled before this quiet, fragile girl. The following days were filled with strange discoveries. Kale tested his strength, finding his body revitalized, his senses sharper than before. Yet every time he looked at Alara, resting in shadowed corners of the castle, he felt the faint trace of her exhaustion, the slow waning of her life force that kept him alive. He began to watch her more closely, not with suspicion this time, but with a strange need to understand her, to protect her. And in her quiet eyes he sensed longing, not for him alone, but for recognition, for a truth she could barely voice. Ilara, meanwhile, dreamt in restless visions. She saw the forests of her childhood, the faces of those who had taught her to use her strange gift, and the shadow of a curse that had marked her bloodline. Each time she healed Kale, she felt a piece of herself fade, and yet she could not stop. Her life was bound to his, in ways she did not yet fully comprehend. One night, Kale returned to her chambers unannounced. She lay on a low bed, her hands resting across her chest, pale and almost translucent under the moonlight. He knelt beside her, his silver eyes reflecting the faint glow of her magic. "You do not rest merely from sleep," he said quietly. "There is something else. Something I do not understand." Alara opened her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze. "It is true," she whispered. "I give my strength to keep you alive. You are broken. I cannot let you fall." Kale's breath caught. He had fought countless battles, faced death more times than he could remember, yet now he felt powerless. This girl, so fragile, so quiet, held more power than he had ever imagined. And worse, he felt drawn to her, not by desire, but by a strange, undeniable need. "You are extraordinary," Kale admitted, the words tasting strange on his tongue. "And yet you are in danger. You cannot continue like this. I will not allow it." Alara's lips trembled. "I have no choice. My life is tied to yours." Kale's hands clenched at his sides. He was not used to helplessness, and yet he could not deny the truth. If she continued, her body would fail, her life fading like mist under the rising sun. And yet, to forbid her, to deny her purpose, seemed impossible. The castle outside whispered with wind and shadow, as if sensing the fragile balance of life and power in its halls. Kale realized that everything had changed. His strength, once his alone, now depended on the quiet girl who had been called weak. And her fate, her very life, hung between shadows and sacrifice. Hook. That night Kale stayed in her chamber, watching over her as she slept. When dawn's light, faint and ghostly, crept through the stone window, he noticed her breathing shallow, her hand glowing faintly. A sudden fear gripped him. What if she did not wake? And in that moment, Kale understood something terrifying and undeniable. Her life was the only thing keeping him alive, and if she fell, he would follow her into the shadows. The sun never truly reached the castle, and yet the first light of morning filtered faintly through the narrow windows. Kale had not left Alara's side since the previous night. He watched her sleep, her delicate chest rising and falling with effort, and the glow around her hands had dimmed. He felt a tight knot in his chest, a strange mixture of fear, guilt, and something he could not name. Alara stirred, blinking against the dim light. "You stayed?" she asked softly, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. Kale's silver eyes met hers, unwavering. "I could not leave you, not now." "Not ever." His tone was firm, but beneath it lay a current of emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. Alara's lips trembled. She wanted to tell him to stop worrying, to leave her be, but she knew it would be useless. Kale's pride would not allow him to ignore a need, and his presence was stronger than any command she could give. Instead, she tried to rise from the bed, but her legs gave way and Kale caught her gently. "You must rest," he said. "Your strength is not endless." I underestimated you." Alara's eyes flickered with emotion, shame, fear, and a glimmer of pride. I did it to help you," she said, her voice barely audible. "I could not bear to see you weak." Kale's jaw tightened. He had faced armies, monsters, even death itself, yet he had never felt the helplessness he felt now. He studied her face, seeing the toll her gift had taken, the pale skin, the dark circles under her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands. She was strong, yes, but the strength came at a price he could not yet bear to calculate. "You are extraordinary," he whispered, almost to himself, "and yet you risk too much." Alara lowered her gaze. She knew he was right, but how could she stop? Her life was entwined with his, her magic bound by ancient laws she did not fully understand. She had been trained to heal, to sacrifice, to give without expecting return. But she had never imagined someone like Kale, a man so powerful, so untouchable, would need her in ways that drained her very essence. Days passed, and Kale began observing her more closely. He noticed the subtle ways she conserved her strength, how she slept in small bursts, how she avoided unnecessary exertion, and how, despite her fatigue, her presence seemed to radiate a quiet power that steadied him. One afternoon, Kale summoned her to the throne room. The courtiers were present, murmuring quietly as the girl who had been called weak walked with measured steps toward the king. Kale's eyes bore into her, sharp and commanding, but there was a new depth to his gaze, an awareness that had not existed before. "You have been called weak," Kale said, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "And yet I see now that you are far from it. Tell me, girl, how do you sustain me?" Alara's lips parted slightly. She looked at the floor, then at Kale, then at the assembled court. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, heavy with judgment and curiosity. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I give you my strength," she admitted. "It is not voluntary. My magic in my blood, it heals you, restores you. I cannot stop it." A hush fell over the room. The courtiers stared, mouths slightly open. Some whispered in awe, others in fear. Kale's gaze never wavered from hers. He felt a rush of emotion, anger at himself for misunderstanding, awe at her courage, and something deeper that tightened his chest. "You risk your life for me," he said, his tone both accusation and wonder. "And yet you never spoke of this." Alara bowed her head. "I feared your anger. I feared you would reject me if you knew the cost." Kale stepped closer, the long shadow of his form falling over her. "I should have seen this," he said, voice low. "I judged you wrongly, but now I see your strength is in your silence, your sacrifice, your courage. I am beholden to you." Alara looked up, meeting his gaze. The intensity of his silver eyes made her heart pound. She had healed kings, warriors, even creatures of the dark, but none had ever looked at her like this. Not with awe, not with reverence, and certainly not with the unspoken tenderness Kale now displayed. "Beholden?" she asked softly. Kale's jaw tightened. "Yes, you keep me alive. I am stronger because of you, and yet I cannot allow your life to waste away while mine continues. Do you understand?" Alara swallowed hard. She did understand, but the truth was painful. She could not stop her gift, and even if she could, she would not. Kale's life and her own were intertwined in ways she barely comprehended. The tension between them shifted subtly over the following days. Kale allowed her more freedom within the castle, observing her carefully, yet refraining from interference unless her life was at risk. Alara, sensing his changing attitude, began to assert herself more, testing boundaries, offering insight into the workings of her magic, and showing him glimpses of her inner strength. One evening, a messenger arrived with news that sent a chill through the castle. A rival vampire lord, long thought defeated, had gathered forces and marched toward Kale's domain. The threat was immediate, and the castle prepared for war. Kale's body, once weakened, now felt the strain of battle looming. Alara, despite her fatigue, insisted on helping. "I must," she said. "If you fall, I cannot forgive myself." Kale's eyes narrowed. "I will not allow it. You will rest while I prepare." But she refused. She had learned to channel her life force in bursts, healing Kale's wounds and replenishing his strength. Each time she did, her pale hands glowed and her body shook with exhaustion. Kale realized that every victory, every moment of strength he displayed, came at her expense. And yet he could not stop her, not without denying the bond forming between them. As the rival army approached, Kale and Alara trained in secret. He taught her to focus her magic more efficiently, to give strength without completely draining herself. She taught him to sense the energy of the castle, the pulse of life in its stones, and how to rely on forces beyond brute strength. Slowly, a partnership formed, one built on trust, necessity, and an unspoken emotional tether that neither fully acknowledged. On the eve of battle, Kale found Alara in the highest tower, gazing out over the forest. Her hands glowed faintly, and the wind tossed her dark hair around her face. She did not turn when he entered, but he felt her presence like a quiet flame in the darkness. "You cannot do this alone," Kale said, his voice softer than usual. "You must rest. I will fight and you will survive." Alara finally turned to face him, eyes filled with determination. "I cannot watch you suffer while I do nothing," she said. I am bound to you, Kale. In life, in strength, in everything. If you fall, I fall." Kale felt a shiver run down his spine. He had faced death countless times, yet this truth terrified him. Her life, fragile and luminous, was tied to his. If she perished, he would not survive her loss. He reached out, taking her hands in his, feeling the faint pulse of her magic. "Then we face this together," he said, voice steady but heart racing. "But you will not sacrifice yourself recklessly. I will not allow it." Alara's lips curved into a faint smile. "I cannot promise that, but I can promise you this: I will not abandon you. Not now, not ever." The night deepened, wrapping the castle in shadow and silence. The rival army drew closer, unseen but sensed, their presence like a dark storm gathering on the horizon. Kale and Alara stood together, bound by an unspoken understanding, each aware of the dangers yet unwilling to let go of the fragile connection forming between them. Kale's hand brushed hers once more, lingering. "I called you weak," he admitted, voice low, "and I was wrong. You are everything I did not know I needed." Alara's eyes softened, a mixture of gratitude, fear, and something deeper flickering in their depths. "And you are more than I imagined," she whispered. "Stronger and yet human in ways I never expected." A gust of wind rattled the tower windows, and in that moment the castle seemed to hold its breath. Both of them knew the coming days would test their limits, their courage, and the fragile bond that now tied them together. Yet neither could turn away. Hook, as the first sounds of the enemy's approach echoed faintly through the forest, Alara's hands glowed brighter than ever, her strength nearly spent. Kale looked at her, silver eyes wide with a sudden, icy fear. If she faltered now, if her life drained completely in this battle, he would lose more than a soldier or ally. He would lose the only soul who had ever healed him, body and heart alike. The night was alive with tension. From the castle walls, the faint glow of torches cast long shadows that danced across the stone. Outside, the rival vampire lord's army pressed forward, a dark tide moving silently through the misty forest. Kale stood on the highest battlement, cloak billowing in the wind, silver eyes scanning the horizon. Beside him, Alara rested lightly, her hands glowing faintly with the life force she had conserved through careful days. "Are you ready?" Kale asked, his voice low but carrying over the quiet night. Alara met his gaze, her dark eyes steady. "I do not have a choice," she said softly. "I must be with you. If I am not, you will not survive." Kale's chest tightened. He had faced countless foes, endured years of loneliness, and ruled with iron. Yet this fragile girl had stirred something in him he could not name. Her strength, her courage, her willingness to place herself at risk, it both terrified and awed him. He wanted to command her to retreat to save herself, but every instinct, every heartbeat, told him that she belonged here beside him. "Very well," he said, his hand brushing briefly against hers, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. "Then we fight together." The first attack came at midnight. Shadows surged against the castle walls as the rival lord's minions stormed forward, their movements swift and deadly. Kale moved with precision, his body now revitalized by Alara's hidden magic. Every swing of his blade, every step he took, carried the weight of countless victories. But this battle was different. The stakes were not only life or death, but the fragile connection that tied him to Alara. Alara followed, her hands glowing brighter, her magic flowing through her in pulses that strengthened Kale, healed his minor wounds, and shielded him from the deadliest strikes. Each time she did, her body trembled, her pale skin growing paler still. Kale noticed and his heart clenched. "Do not push yourself too far," he called, parrying a strike from a massive shadow warrior. Alara's lips curved faintly into a determined smile. "I cannot watch you fall," she said, "even if it costs me everything." Kale's mind raced. Her words were brave, but they carried a weight he could not ignore. He realized then that her sacrifice was greater than any weapon, any army. They were fighting together, yet she bore the hidden cost of every victory. The battle surged through the night, a chaotic symphony of shadows and steel. Kale moved like a force of nature, his movements fluid, precise, unstoppable. Yet even his strength had limits, and more than once he felt the pull of exhaustion that threatened to slow him. Each time Alara's magic flared, unseen and unacknowledged by anyone but him. Her life flowed into his, restoring him, sustaining him and leaving her drained, trembling, near collapse. After a brief lull, Kale found himself in a narrow hallway, facing a dozen shadow soldiers at once. He could feel the pulse of Alara's magic behind him, guiding his movements, lending him strength. But when he glanced back, he saw her on her knees, hands glowing faintly, body trembling under the strain. "Alara," he called, his voice sharp, cutting through the clamor of battle. He rushed to her side, lifting her gently. "This is too much. You cannot give yourself completely." "Not for me, not for anyone." Alara's eyes met his, dark and unwavering. "I cannot stop now. If you fall, Kale, I cannot bear it. You must live, even if I do not." Kale's heart ached with both admiration and fear. She was brave, yes, but the cost was unbearable. He realized he could no longer think of her as fragile or weak. She was a force of nature, delicate in appearance but fierce in spirit. And yet, he could not ignore the danger she faced. In a sudden moment of clarity, Kale pulled her to a secluded chamber within the castle. The walls were lined with ancient tomes and relics, cursed artifacts that hummed faintly with energy. Here, away from the chaos, he could see the toll her magic had taken on her. Her body was pale, trembling, and she struggled to remain conscious. "You cannot continue like this," Kale said, his voice low, urgent. "You are giving yourself too much. I will not allow it." Alara's lips trembled, and for a brief moment the mask of determination fell away. I have no choice," she whispered. "My life is tied to yours. If I stop, even for a moment, you will weaken, you may die. I cannot live with that." Kale knelt beside her, placing his hands over hers, feeling the faint pulse of her magic. "We will find another way," he said. "I will not lose you. Not to this curse, not to this battle, not to me." Alara looked into his eyes, and for a moment the world outside, the shadows, the soldiers, the rival lord, ceased to exist. There was only him and her, and the fragile thread that bound them together. She had given so much, sacrificed so much, and yet here he was, willing to fight for her as fiercely as she had fought for him. "Can you trust me?" Kale asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Alara nodded, though her hands shook. "Yes, I trust you." The night stretched on, and the rival army pressed harder against the castle. Kale and Alara emerged from the hidden chamber, their bond solidified, their strategy clear. Kale would fight, with Alara's magic supporting him, but he would also protect her, ensuring she did not overextend herself. Together, they were stronger than either could have imagined. As they faced the enemy in the grand hall, Kale saw the rival lord for the first time, a figure cloaked in darkness, eyes glowing with malice, aura radiating power that rivaled his own. The two locked eyes, and the air itself seemed to shiver with anticipation. "You cannot win," the rival lord hissed. "Your strength is borrowed, your life dependent." Kale's gaze shifted briefly to Alara. She stood behind him, glowing faintly, fragile yet unyielding. Her magic flowed to him, steady and strong, and he realized that the words of the rival lord were only half true. Yes, he relied on her, but not as a weakness. Her strength, her courage, her sacrifice, these were gifts, and he would honor them. With a roar that shook the walls, Kale charged. Shadows clashed, steel rang against steel, and magic flared in bursts of light. Alara's glow brightened, pulses of energy sustaining him, healing wounds and shielding him from the deadliest blows. She was exhausted, trembling yet resolute, her eyes never leaving him. The battle reached a fever pitch. Kale fought with everything he had, but the rival lord was cunning, powerful, and relentless. In a sudden, terrifying moment, the rival lord struck Kale down, his weapon piercing the king's side. Pain seared through Kale, and he faltered on the brink of collapse. Alara's magic surged violently, brighter than ever before. She poured herself into him fully, risking everything, and Kale felt his strength return. But the cost was immediate. Alara collapsed to the ground, pale and trembling, her life force nearly spent. Kale fell to his knees beside her, terror gripping his heart. He had faced death countless times, but this, seeing the one who had given him everything reduced to weakness by her own sacrifice, was unbearable. "Alara, no," he whispered, lifting her gently. "You cannot leave me, not now, not ever." Her eyes fluttered open, weak but resolute. "I am with you," she whispered, "always with you." Kale's heart ached with a mixture of guilt, love, and determination. He realized that their fates were now truly intertwined, not by chance but by choice. Her strength had saved him, and he would spend whatever remained of his life protecting her. As the rival lord staggered back, wounded but not defeated, Kale rose, holding Alara carefully. He moved with a newfound clarity, understanding that power alone was not enough. Strength must be paired with trust, with sacrifice, with love. And he would fight not only to save his kingdom but to save her, to honor her courage, and to ensure that neither of them would fall alone. Hook, as dawn crept through the castle windows, casting long shadows across the battle-torn hall, Kale realized something terrifying. The rival lord's curse had bound their lives together in ways he did not yet fully understand. If Alara fell completely, he would follow her into darkness. And worse, the enemy had not yet revealed the full extent of his power. Kale held Alara close, silver eyes blazing with resolve. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and nothing would break the bond forged in blood, sacrifice, and unspoken love. The dawn broke slowly over the castle, a pale light spilling through the narrow windows. The hallway still echoed with the remnants of the night's battle, shattered torches, splintered furniture, and faint traces of shadowed blood. Kale stood in the center of the grand hall, holding Alara gently in his arms. Her breathing was shallow, her body pale, but her eyes met his, unwavering and full of quiet strength. He knelt beside her, placing his hands over hers, feeling the faint pulse of life that remained. "You cannot do this alone," he said, voice low, trembling. "I will not allow it. You are not a tool for my survival, Ilara. You are everything to me." Ilara's lips curved into a faint, weary smile. "I am bound to you," she whispered. "Not by duty, but by choice. My strength is yours because I wish it to be, always." Kale's heart tightened. He had spent centuries ruling with fear, relying on power, dominance, and strategy. Yet here, in the fragile glow of her sacrifice, he understood something he had never known. Strength alone meant nothing without trust, without love, without the courage to let another soul bear part of your burden. The rival vampire lord staggered into the hall, wounds deep, aura dark and threatening. He had underestimated Kale's strength, but more importantly, he had underestimated Ilara. Her magic had fueled Kale, guided him, and allowed him to stand despite the odds. Now she sat trembling in Kale's arms, yet her presence radiated power in its quiet, unyielding way. "You cannot defeat me," the rival lord hissed. "Your power is borrowed, your life dependent. When she falls, so do you." Kale's silver eyes narrowed, and he took a deep breath. He glanced at Ilara, who gave him a faint nod. Together they had faced the storm. Together they would endure whatever darkness came next. "I do not deny it," Kale said, voice steady. "I rely on her, and I am stronger because of it. But strength is not weakness. It is trust and courage and sacrifice. You will see it now." He placed Ilara gently on the floor, and she rose slowly, trembling but determined. Her hands glowed brightly, her magic flowing not recklessly but with control, guided by the knowledge Kale had helped her unlock. The rival lord's eyes widened, sensing the surge of power that was both hers and Kale's, intertwined like fire and shadow. The final confrontation began. Kale and Ilara moved as one, their synergy seamless. Her magic shielded him, restored him, and bolstered his movements, while his sword struck with precision and power. Each attack was met with counter, each defense perfectly timed. They were no longer separate. They were a single force, a storm of life and shadow that the enemy could not comprehend. In a crucial moment, the rival lord lunged at Kale with a deadly strike aimed at his heart. Kale faltered, but Ilara stepped forward, channeling her full power to protect him. The energy flowed through her, bright and scorching, and the rival lord recoiled, caught in the brilliance. Kale seized the moment, striking true, piercing the rival's defenses. The enemy fell, defeated but not destroyed, retreating into the shadows with a curse that promised vengeance. Kale rushed to Ilara, who collapsed to the ground, exhausted beyond measure. He knelt beside her, cradling her head in his hands, silver eyes reflecting both fear and awe. "You gave everything," he whispered. "Do you understand what you have done?" Ilara's breathing was shallow, but her eyes glimmered. I did not fear it," she said softly. "I gave because I chose to. For you, for us." Kale felt a rush of emotion he had never allowed himself to feel. He leaned down, brushing his lips gently against her forehead, a silent promise and gratitude entwined in the gesture. "Then we survive together," he said, voice steady, full of determination. "No darkness will take you from me, not now, not ever." The following days were quiet but charged with a new awareness. The castle, though scarred from the battle, seemed alive with a gentle pulse, as if recognizing the bond between its king and the woman who had given him life. Kale spent hours studying ancient texts and relics, seeking a way to sever the lingering threads of the rival lord's curse, while Ilara rested, slowly regaining her strength. They learned to balance their powers. Ilara discovered she could control the flow of her magic, giving enough to strengthen Kale without endangering herself. Kale learned humility and trust, relying on her strength without letting it diminish her. Their bond deepened, no longer built solely on necessity, but on understanding, admiration, and a quiet love that had grown in the fires of sacrifice. One evening, Kale brought Ilara to the highest tower. The first true light of dawn spilled across the horizon, casting golden hues over the dark forest and the castle walls. She leaned against the battlement, pale hair catching the light, eyes reflective. "You have changed me," Kale said, standing beside her. "I have ruled for centuries, relied on fear and power, and yet I never knew this." Alara glanced at him, a small smile forming. This trust, strength in another, courage that is not my own, yet lifts me higher than anything I could achieve alone," Kale said. "You have shown me that power is not only in dominance, but in the willingness to sacrifice, to give, to care. I am better because of you." Alara felt warmth spread through her chest. "And I am stronger because I am seen, because I am trusted, because I am not alone." For a long moment, they simply stood together, watching the light break over the horizon. The castle, the forest, the scars of battle, all of it seemed to fade into insignificance compared to the bond they now shared. Kale reached out, taking her hands in his, feeling the pulse of life and magic that had sustained him through the darkest nights. "No enemy, no curse, no shadow can separate us now," he said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Alara nodded, her dark eyes shimmering. "Together," she agreed. "Always." Days turned into weeks, and the castle slowly returned to a semblance of peace. Kale's wounds had healed completely, not only from her magic but from the deeper restoration of trust and connection. Alara's strength returned as well, stronger than before, tempered by experience, patience, and the knowledge that her gift was not a burden but a bond. The rival lord remained at large, lurking in the shadows, a threat that reminded them that darkness never fully disappeared. Yet Kale and Alara faced this reality with newfound confidence. They had survived the impossible together, and in doing so had transformed, not only themselves but the fate of the castle and its people. One evening, as the sun dipped low, and the sky turned to molten gold and crimson, Kale led Alara to the central hall, where the throne stood quiet and empty. The courtiers and guards had gathered, but the focus of the room was not the king nor the throne, but the woman who had changed him. "You have given me life," Kale announced, voice ringing through the hall. "Not only my body, but my heart. And for that you are no longer a shadow, no longer weak, no longer unseen. You are my equal, my partner, and my strength. Together we are unbroken." Alara stepped forward, head held high. The hall, once filled with whispers of doubt and judgment, was now silent, awed by the courage, sacrifice, and bond between the two. For the first time she felt fully recognized, fully valued, fully free. Kale took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "The days ahead may hold darkness," he said softly, "but no shadow, no curse, and no foe can touch us as long as we are together." Alara's eyes softened, a quiet glow of hope and love reflected in them. "Then let us face it together," she said. The castle seemed to breathe with them, shadows retreating, the first rays of sunlight casting warmth over stone and sky. In that moment, Kale and Alara understood something eternal. True strength was not in solitude or power alone, but in connection, in trust, in love that could endure sacrifice and still grow brighter. As they stood together atop the battlements, the wind teasing their hair, Kale's silver eyes met Alara's dark ones, and they shared a silent promise. Whatever storms, curses, or enemies might come, they would face them side by side. Their bond, forged in shadow, blood, and quiet sacrifice, was unbreakable, hook closing emotion. And yet, in the quiet of the castle, in the faint rustle of wind through stone towers, a shadow lingered, an echo of the rival lord's curse, a reminder that darkness never truly ends. But Kale and Alara, bound by life, trust, and love, faced it together, and together they were unstoppable.